Okay, welcome back everybody. You should have just seen me complete the left hand and the right hand cheek for the square fitting, or with a square back and square throat on that. And now we're going to move on to the actual fabrication of the the throat, the section that's going to connect the two fittings here, and the heel as well. So it's going to look like this. This is going to be our throat, and then this is going to be the heel. Unfortunately, when we build these, we don't have the tools in the shop to build them as a separate individual piece, because this short piece is too short to go through the lock former without jamming up. So we're actually going to fabricate these two pieces, they're the exact same width and everything, as one single piece, and then we'll slice them after we run them through the lock former. So here we go. We'll start in with this. So if we look at the plan, we left off on page 52 before with the cheeks. On 53 it starts the throat and then the heel on the next page. So I'm going to separate this so you can look at both patterns, being we're going to be building them together. And then I'm just going to fold the edge over. I know these are different scales because they're different sizes, but say we're going to take these two pieces, they're exact same width and everything in the real life here, and we're just going to connect them together and take out the reliefs. So let's look at the first section first. When I get into this, you'll notice that the lock former that we've got in the shop here is a 7/8 take-up. That's not the norm. Most of the time in the field it is going to be a true 1-inch take-up for the lock form on each side. But ours is set at 7/8. It's been there long before myself, before I took over, and I'm going to let it that way because I do think it helps with students learning how to use their tape measure and math skills and everything like that. So with that, the fitting is 8 inches in width or height, however you want to look at it, and then we've got to take up a dimension for our lock form here and here, and that's 7/8. So 8 inches, which it's given here on the right, plus 7/8 plus 7/8 comes up to 9 3/4. And then if we look back at the cheek, our distance of the part was 10 and 2 1/2. So we got 10, 11, 12 1/2 inches for the one side and another 12 1/2 inches for the other side. So that's where these dimensions come into play. We got the 12 1/2. Again, I will not be bending these until the end. They're just showing where the slip and drive goes. You don't even have to mark them if you don't want to. Just make sure you don't mess up your dimensions. And then on the other side, we got that 12 1/2. So here's your 12 1/2, and here's your 12 1/2 with the pivot point right in the center. Notice too, when we make this, we're going to have to notch this corner out because you can't bend that lock former over both directions. So let's get into it, and I'll show you how to make the throat and tie that right on with it. So I've already taken the time to cut my width of my part, so let's go ahead with that. So I've got my 9 3/4 here set up to the dimensions that we need. Right there, 9 3/4 all the way down. And I've already taken the time to mark my 7/8 using my scribe. So I just take it right on the edge of the table, find the 7/8 dimension there, and scribe it on that side, and do the same for the other, right on down the line there with that part. Now that that's complete, we're ready to perform the notching procedure. There's not really a lot to notching the edges that are exposed, but remember, I do have an additional section for the throat, which is actually going to be, so this throat on the fitting here is going to have a 2 1/2 inch take up and a 2 1/2 inch take up, which they've drawn on the plan, 2 1/2 and 2 1/2 there with that. So it's all taken into account. So I've got a 25-inch section in the back and a 5-inch section in the front here. Okay, so with that, I know I'm kind of jumping around, but let's go ahead and notching this thing out. So let's start with the left edge, being that is exposed for us to look at. We're going to take our notcher and we're going to notch right into the sheet on the 7/8 mark with the tip here. And do the same on the opposite edge with that. At this point in time, I'm just going to mark the 1/2 inch so you can see what we're looking at. This is unnecessary. until later, and actually it'll be when we utilize the bar folder here. We're going to slip that on there, and then we'll bend that around for our slip and drive later on after it's graded and everything as well. But at this point, I'm going to finish up the part by cutting the corners out of it. Again, you do not want to have them straight like this here. You want to have them just a couple degrees set back, and then snip them out of there so everything stays out of the road. Okay. All right. Now we'll go down and we'll look at the other end of the piece. Now I can't really just take my notcher and do the exact same. Essentially it is the same part of the project. So if you look at this is my template here. I've already done that. I can flip it over and I could do the same thing here on this part of the piece there. I made this template to show you what this is supposed to look like. So in between here we got our 2.5 inches to the center and our 2.5 inches. So let's look at the outside edge. We'll finish that, and then I'll work on the middles between the two pieces. So again, just like before, take your notcher on the 7/8 marks, take them two sections out of there and snip those out, and we can remove that as well. One there and this one as well. Now we've got the most challenging part of the project here, and it's how to make this section here on the end of that piece, and on the other end of this piece is to make this section here, which isn't really that hard. So I saved a part from the previous project, and it looks like this, kind of like a little barn roof or whatever, and we're going to line that up just as if it was laying in there. Say if it was separated, we could take our notcher, and if it was two pieces, we just notch out that corner this direction and flip it right around and notch out the other direction, and do the same down here in both ways. But obviously the notcher can't fit in there, and we need it as one long piece so it fits through that lock former. Without this short piece, if I ran this one through it, it would lock up and probably jam up in the lock former. So with that being said, you can take, just like you would with your notcher, and these are just some scrap sections on the 7/8 mark, and I'll see if I can find another one. I suppose not. So we'll do it with one. And we would lay that right on the edge of the sheet, just like if we had our notcher in there, right on the point. That section that's going to be taken out, and we're going to mark the top of that, and then we'll flip it over, lay it right on the point again, right where it belongs, and we're going to mark the other side with that. And then just like before, we're just going to cut them corners out of there with our tin snips. We'll do the same on the other side then. So let me finish marking these. So here's a section with that 3/4 inch notch out of there, and then we'll flip it over again and mark that, and then take them and relieve them off. And again, it should look kind of like that little barn roof that we've taken out of there. There's one, and then there's two. This one's upside down, of course, but from the edge of the sheet it'll be fine. After you've got that complete, you just simply take your tin snips and follow the lines that you've made for that part. Okay. All right. Okay, so I had to switch batteries there for a second in the camera. We're up to almost just about ready to lock form it. There's just a couple things that we have to do, and that's take these relief corners out of the throat in the center of it, as well as the heel, so we can bend these lock forms over and not run into each other. So that's real simple. You just measure the distance, which is 2.5 inches for the throat to the center, or 2.5 inches from each edge. So 2.5 inches over, which I've already done. Just take my tape measure here, set it on 2.5 inches. Don't cut your tape measure when you do this, and snip that out. And we'll do the same. Hopefully I'll do it this way so you can see it on camera here. and cut the other relief 2.5 inches out. You can do that with a tin snips too. I do like the notcher. It seems to make a nice clean mark. So let me flip this around so it's kind of sitting how it has been. So there's your throat, and then let's take care of the heel, which should be at 12.5 inches from each edge. So again, with your tape measure, measure your 12.5 inches for this part, and we'll make that relief. This time I'm just going to flip it over. I'll cut it from the back side. Okay, we've got our part ready for the lock form now, so stand by. Okay, here we are at our lock form. I've actually got 2 of them in the shop there, but this one here, it says, and I don't have the book on it exactly, but they've said 8 inches is the minimum they recommend running through this one. It probably does need some work. I suppose the wheels and everything could be repaired, maybe cleaning and things like that as well, and that may help too. But anyway, we're going to run it through the lock form, and when we do this, we're going to keep the part as straight along this edge as absolutely possible, and then with the machine running, we're going to run it in there, being very careful when it catches up in here in the wheels that it doesn't pull or move your sheet, just maintaining this edge, keeping everything tight up against that fence. So here we go. I'll show you, and we've got our lines up, so they'll be on the inside of the part, and then when we get through at the other side, I'll flip it around and I'll run it that direction as well. So again, lines up for this one. So keeping it tight against the fence. We started off watching here to make certain there's nothing that pulls away, and we'll just kind of walk it right on through the wheels there, and you notice how it kind of stopped as it went through those edges there. So let's try this direction. Sliding it through again, making certain it was tight against that fence, and by this point it's, you know, all over. So there's our section of the heel and the throat ready to go. So let's walk on over to the shear then, and let's slice it off into the 2 pieces. So I've already got it marked previously from our dimensions there, so I'm just going to look in there. I don't know if you can see that at all, but we're going to find the edge and then just cut through it. And now we've got 2 pieces going to lock together. So if you look at it, this one here has to be bent towards me in the center away, so these edges can lock over the throat area. But the outer section, we've got to bend it towards us in the opposite direction, so the pieces, we are going to bend them both at a 90 degree. So let's go ahead and put them in the break. Now it's sometimes hard to find the center, so what you can do is just take your, if you flip it over from the outside, take your awl there and just kind of tap them a little bit and put a little divot in it in the corner there, and that'll indicate that. So, and then we're going to bend them. You can see those divots there. Okay, once we get that together, just lock it down and we'll bend it up to the 90 degree. The other thing you can do is you can flatten these corners, and that'll help you later on when you go to put your drive cleats and everything on there as well. It's kind of preference though. Do it on both edges. It just, sometimes it just makes things go a little smoother later on. Okay, we've got our heel done. Now we got to take care of the throat. Again, the throat's got to be bent the opposite direction, so we've got to bend that line down essentially this time and put it on the mark, so we won't have to use our scribe there, or sorry, our scratch awl, and put those punch marks into it. So we'll tighten it down there, and then we'll pull it up to a 90 degree, just like that. Set that aside. Let me dig my 2 cheeks back out, and we are ready to assemble this project.